This is the fourth video in my road tripping series. In the previous videos, we covered making sure your vehicle is able to make the trip, creating a safety kit, and some packing tips. If you missed any of those videos, check the iCard in the corner or links in the description. In this video, we will cover some tips for planning your trip. If you are planning a trip this summer, I hope these tips can help you get prepped and ready and have a good and enjoyable time. Planning your trip is essential to having a smooth and enjoyable experience. Some things that you should plan ahead include weather and road conditions. You should know the weather at your destination as well as the road conditions for your route to get there. Checking the weather ahead of time allows you to plan what clothing and whatnot you should bring. Although be aware that sometimes the way that weather apps and different websites show things is, well, it's not always the most accurate representation of the situation. I went to Louisiana and said it was going to rain, and it ended up just being humid the whole time, so that was fun. The more important thing is to check road conditions. Most states have a Department of Transportation website that will show the road conditions for various major highways. This can tell you if there are road closures, snow situations that you weren't planning for, blizzard situations you weren't planning for, rock blasting, and various other things. You don't necessarily need to check every road you're traveling, but at the very least check the mountain passes you're going over, since these can have snow problems during the fall, winter, and spring, and rock blasting during the summer. Fun. The next thing you'll want to do is know your route. There are many ways to get to a destination. Knowing which route you're planning on taking can help make things easier when you inevitably have to put in the directions again after you stop for a break. Whenever I'm doing a long road trip, I have to put the directions in again probably 4 or 5 times before I finally make it there. Knowing which route I'm planning on taking prevents me from taking the wrong route on accident. This allows me to have a more consistent and more planned out trip than I would have if I had just, took whichever one was fastest all the time. This can also be helpful if you happen to lose your route while you don't have service. This is the worst possible thing to happen, but if you have a general idea of where you're trying to get to, you could have someone either manually direct you via whatever is loaded onto your phone at the time, or at least know, I'm supposed to stay on this highway until I get to such and such location. It can help to have some basic knowledge of what you're doing before you leave for the day, at least looking at some of the specifics for that specific day before you go. You don't have to memorize the entire thing, and there are going to be some small twists and turns that you might miss, but if you can stick with it long enough to get service again, you can generally be pretty close to where you intended to be in the first place. Knowing your route can also help you plan stops along the way if you need that. Depending on what kind of traveling you're doing, knowing where you're stopping can be very essential or kind of just help. Speaking of losing service, you should consider downloading some maps. Google has this handy feature where you can download a certain map area to your phone. This is less important if you don't have much storage space on your phone, but it can be really helpful if you happen to lose service and your route at the same time. You don't necessarily have to download every map because downloading the entire part of the United States would suck. For example, if I had downloaded pretty much everything between Washington and Nevada, that would have taken up a lot of space. But I could consider downloading some key points where I think that I might lose service and where I might need to know what I'm doing, such as mountain passes, told you those things were tricky, or major desolate areas, which admittedly there was a lot of the route I was taking, but I've driven it a few times, so it wasn't as big of a deal. If you can see that you're going to stop through several towns along the way, you don't necessarily need to download that particular section, since most towns have at least some service or have somewhere where you can stop and connect to Wi-Fi if you really have to. Generally, you want to download areas that you're not stopping out of town on that same road, where you're going to have a turn and you don't necessarily know where it is. Although downloading maps isn't necessary, and you could just buy a basic actual paper map for your car, which is a good alternative, downloading your maps can simplify things and make your life a little bit easier. There are also some apps that specialize in having offline maps available for you. One of the more important things with road tripping is knowing what your sleeping plans are. One of the biggest questions is, are you going to sleep in a hotel, in your car, or are you going to camp along the way? After that, you have to ask yourself, are you going to stop at rest stops, at specific campsites? Are you going to sleep in an RV or camper, in the front seat, in the back seat, in the way back of your car, on a blow-up mattress, on nothing? Do you have a plan? Etc. Make sure you have a good idea of what your sleeping plan is. When I had the Prius, my plan was to lay down the back seats, lay out any comfortable padding that I could on the back trunk area, and lay down back there. This meant that I had to pack everything in something that could fit on the 2 front seats. This significantly limited my packing, but it gave me a lot more comfortable of a place to sleep in that car. In the van, I have a whole bed available. It's great. I love my van. Best choice after the Prius. However, not everyone has the luxury of having an entire bed in their vehicle. Therefore, you should have some plan of where you're going to sleep. My husband hated sleeping in the back of the Prius, so sometimes we would sleep in the front seats because he liked that better. Go figure. If you're planning to stay in hotels, are you going to make reservations beforehand? Although it can be kind of fun to just show up, having reservations can guarantee you a spot a lot more. Although winging it can be a lot more of an adventure, I'll admit that. One other thing to ask yourself is, what is your backup plan if for some reason your sleeping plans don't work? Do you have one? And do you have the things necessary to make it work? Knowing these things can make your whole sleeping situation a lot better. And they can take a lot of stress off of you when you're actually out on the road. It's also helpful to make sure you have emergency money available. Don't consider this trip money. Have it only for emergency situations. Don't factor it into fun and partying and whatever you're doing at your destination. Emergencies happen and you need to have the funds available to get yourself out of it, such as paying for a tow truck, paying for a repair, or even just getting yourself out of a bad place. This can be done by either having a credit card, a traveler's check available, or even some actual cash stashed away somewhere where it's not going to get stolen. Having extra cash can make an emergency a minor emergency instead of a major emergency. The next thing you'll want to ask yourself is, how far can you actually drive? No, seriously, how far can you actually drive? Can you drive 12 hours? 10? 8? 6? 4? 2? Your tolerance of long distance driving is going to significantly impact how far you can go in the days you have available. It can also help you plan accordingly so that you have a more enjoyable trip and aren't stressed out about constantly fighting your body and your needs to get to where you need to go. Most people, although not everyone, can manage to drive about 6 hours in a day. Some people can drive more. Most people can make it at least 6. However, more than 12 hours is going to be very difficult for most people. So if you are the sole driver on your trip, 12-hour days is going to be really difficult, and you're probably not going to make it as far as you think, and you might not actually make it to your destination in the time you have available. If you're taking mostly highways, which I'm going to say are about 60 miles per hour, I know a lot of the United States has faster ones. I'm going with 60 because it will average out if you live in a state with slower ones or if you're taking back roads. But anyway, if you're taking mostly highways, and those highways are 60 miles per hour, a 6-hour drive will get you about 360 miles. Therefore, if you were driving 6-hour days, you could estimate that you could go up to 360 miles in a day. Therefore, if you are getting hotel reservations or planning stops, you should have those stops approximately 360 miles from where you start that day. This is a good tip. This will help you plan. However, if you're taking back roads, many back roads have slower speeds than that. And if you can't do more than 6 hours, you're going to have to go less than 360 miles. Here's the thing though. If you've never gone on a long distance trip and you don't know how far you can go, 360 miles might be a little ambitious. You can plan your stops every 300 to 400 miles, but generally, I would suggest aiming at the lower end of that so that you give yourself a little bit of wiggle room in case you just can't actually go as far as you think you can. If you're more experienced, you can drive further. And if you know how far you can actually drive, you can make more educated guesses about how far you can get in a day. Additionally, if you're going to drive in shifts, this will give you the ability to go a little bit further. But I'll have some more specific tips on that in a minute. Personally, I can comfortably drive about 9 hours in a day by myself. I know. Applause. I wish I could do more though, if I'm being honest, but 9 hours is about how much I could do. On our most recent trip, I drove the 1,100 miles it is to Vegas from where I live in about 2 days, meaning that I was averaging about 550 miles a day. However, I wouldn't expect someone who is less experienced with road tripping or who doesn't know their tolerance for driving to be able to do this. Plan for less until you've proven that you can do more. Also, most trips I have a harder time actually making this time. So, I can't always rely on that either. Depending on how long you think you can drive, you also might want to consider if you're destination or journey focused. Destination focused people are focused on getting to their final destination before they start enjoying their trip. This can be just fine, and if you know you're a destination focused person, that's cool. However, if you're a journey focused person, you'll want to make many stops along the way to see different attractions or things that catch your eye. Anything that's cool and shiny and fancy along the way. If you're going on a trip with someone who is destination focused and you are journey focused, you might not enjoy the trip as much as you would think. This can be a major source of conflict on road trips. Having a discussion ahead of time about whether or not you're going to be making any stops along the way, how frequently that person is comfortable stopping, and whether you're going to have a destination or journey focused trip can really help ease some of the tension so that you know what to expect, even if you have to concede your side a little bit. You can also experiment with doing a little bit of both. You can agree to making 2 to 3 stops across the entire trip, but mostly focusing on getting to your final destination. This can help make everyone's lives just a little bit more comfortable as they journey together. Alternatively, if you're going with someone that you're going to travel with often, you may try being destination focused one trip and journey focused on the next. The next big question you should ask while you're planning is, how much time do you actually have available? Me and my husband are lucky in that because he is an RN, he has a long stretch of time off. And, well, I'm doing YouTube right now. I have all the time in the world. Thus, we have fairly long stretches to do these long road trips. Most people who work 5 days a week are not so lucky. Most road trips are going to be difficult to do in just a 2-day period. You're going to have to do driving on both of the days you have available, which means you're not going to have one whole day dedicated to just enjoying your destination. It also means that you're not going to be able to go very far from where you started, which can kind of suck. Ideally, if you go on a road trip, you'll want to do it on either a long weekend so that you have at least one day at your destination, or you'll want to take some time off. However, if you do take time off, make sure you know exactly how many days you have and when you plan to get back so that you can reduce the stress of going back to work the next day. An additional consideration, if you have less time, is to consider doing a loop. A loop allows you to get more driving in and see more sights than if you were to go just straight out and back. This means that you can set several stops along the way to see and do things in the shorter amount of time that you have. Generally, you want to have at least a day or two at whatever destination you go to actually enjoy the place you worked so hard to get to. On the trip that I went on, part of why we did our driving in 2 days was so that we could spend more time at our destination when we finally got there. It did make our trip a lot more enjoyable. I mentioned this briefly at the beginning, but one of the biggest considerations you should have is if you're bringing kids or pets with you. As I said, I don't travel with children of any age, but especially not young children. Me and my husband are 2 adults, which means that we're pretty much responsible for ourselves. This is pretty helpful so that we can have a better time on road trips. However, young children have extra needs that 2 adults just don't. Children generally don't enjoy being cooped up in a small vehicle and not being able to do things or move around or play, and therefore can make road trips absolutely miserable. Most of the people I talk to who say they hate road trips last went on one with a child. Sorry, it's true. If you do decide to travel with children, you might consider renting an RV, which will give them more space to move around. It will add to the cost of your trip, but it will generally make your trip a lot more enjoyable. It also allows you to have increased space to meet their needs while driving, which is kind of important for enjoyment of everyone. You might also want to consider alternatives like flying or going somewhere closer to home. If you cannot do any of these things, take the time to meet your child's needs. You'll want to take frequent stops so they can get up and move around and run and play and have fun before they have to get back into the cramped, stupid car. Remember, road tripping is even more unbearable for them than it is for you, even if you're having a terrible time. Additional caveat, I don't travel with pets. When we go on road trips, we get someone to watch our pets for us. First off, they wouldn't have a good time on a trip anyway. But more importantly, traveling can be very stressful on pets in general. Having someone watch your pets can make your trip more enjoyable and convenient than you would ever consider it. Just like children, pets have many more needs than you do, and can have a really miserable time on trips. A lot of pets have a hard time with change and stress, and can even develop health problems as a result of this. Thus, if you're thinking about bringing a pet with you on a trip, you should really consider whether it's in the best interest of the pet to take them with, or whether you should instead consider getting a sitter or boarding them while you're on your trip. Generally, the change to a more pet-friendly environment or having a new person at home is less stressful than going into a new place in new stressful things and in a car. Pets generally don't like cars. If, however, you do bring your pet, make sure that you set up your cars to meet their needs as best you can. Having food or water at regular intervals can be helpful, although don't be surprised if your pet doesn't eat for the first couple days, because generally they avoid eating when they're stressed out. You also want to make sure to give your pet enough time to stretch and to keep them safe with leashes, even if it's a cat, which admittedly, I don't know why you're bringing a cat on a road trip, but if you do because you love your cat and your cat is your emotional support animal and whatever reasons, get them a cat harness. Do not let your cat wander around loose in areas where they aren't familiar. This is also true of dogs. Not everyone likes dogs, first off, so you should always have your dog leashed up, but dogs can easily get lost at different places that are away from home. And the last thing you want is to put up posters saying, I lost my dog at a rest stop, or a scenic view, or whatever. You don't want to lose your dog. Just put your dog on a leash. It's just better for everyone. However, if you're bringing a pet, make sure you stop frequently, let them out, let them stretch their little leggies, and have some time away from the moving, obnoxious moving box. They get car sick because they have a hard time telling that the road is moving. You know, that's the whole thing that causes car sickness, is your eyes and your ears not agreeing with each other. So they can get car sick, they can have a hard time, and they can be stressed out. Seriously, think about it before you bring your pet on a long trip. It might not be the nicest thing to do to them. This is the end of part 4 in my road trip series. If you missed the previous videos in this series, including getting your car travel ready, creating a safety kit, and what to pack, check the iCard for my road trip playlist. In the next video, we will cover tips to make the actual drive more enjoyable. If you are planning an upcoming road trip, I hope this series has helped you prepare. And if you are traveling with kids or pets, let me know in the comments if you have any tips to make travel more enjoyable. To be notified of my next video, rev the subscribe button and honk the horn, bell. Stay safe for everyone.